All right. Hope everyone can hear me. First of all, a warm welcome to all of you all on behalf of the organizers and myself. I'm your host for today's presentation, Propagation 101. Uh, Please, QRX. Right. Uh, I'm your host for today's presentation, Propagation 101. Raghav, my call sign is Victor Uniform 3, Victor Whiskey Radio from Chennai, India. First of all, a bit of a disclaimer from my end. All the information that I'm presenting here is from my own reading, research, and experiments in the subject. I highly suggest that all those who are listening in do their own further research and experimentation on the subject. With that said, let's move along. A little bit about me. I've been licensed since 2006. I've been interested in homebrewing, DXing, organizing events for my local radio club. I'm currently working on an SDR project known as the Radio Berry along with a few other hams. And I'm not from a technical background. I say this very specifically because a lot of technical jargon in this topic, I will try to make it as simple as possible, as much as understandable, uh, so that if there are any doubts or anything, I will try to clear them then and there. So yes, let's move on to the question of what is propagation. Uh, Right. It is the behavior of the radio waves as it travels through the various parts of the atmosphere. Uh, Now let's take a look at what our atmosphere looks like and the layers of the atmosphere. Right. As you can see here, this is a pictorial representation of our atmosphere. Uh, the lowermost part of the ionosphere, the D layer, starts at the mesosphere layer, and right above the D layer exists the E layer, and above the E layer exists the F layer. Now we will take a closer look at all these layers, but first let us first study what are the factors that affect propagation. Right, we have reflection, refraction, diffraction, absorption, polarization, and scattering. Uh, Reflection, as you all know, it's the change in direction, which is basically the turning back of the waves. Refraction is the bending of waves by means of deflecting it. Again, diffraction is the bending of waves around an obstacle or an aperture. Absorption is the bending of waves around an obstacle. It's the transfer. I'm sorry. It's the transfer of energy of a wave to matter as the wave passes through it. Polarization. Let me try to explain polarization in a little bit of an easier way. Electromagnetic waves, they consist of an oscillating electric and magnetic field which are coupled together, and this is always perpendicular to each other. By convention, the polarization of an electromagnetic wave refers to its electric field. In linear polarization, the field oscillates in one direction. In circular polarization, the field rotates in a plane at a constant rate. We will look at it much later on, if we have time, topics such as polarization and scattering. Scattering denotes the deviation of a reflected wave from the predicted angle. So these are the basic factors that affect propagation. For HF propagation, we will be looking at these three factors: reflection, refraction, and absorption. As I said earlier, refraction is the bending of radio waves by the ionosphere, and this is determined by the ionization level of the layer and the wavelength of the signal that is being bent. The ionization, in very simple terms, what it means is that when energy is applied to an atom, it either loses or gains electrons. In that state, the particle is said to be ionized. As I said earlier, the ionization of an particular layer will depend on certain factors, which we'll look at later. Like I said, the ionization is also dependent on the, I'm sorry, the refraction is also dependent on the wavelength of the signal. Uh, the stronger the ionization of the layer, the more the layer tends to refract HF waves. Signals with smaller wavelengths such as 2 meters and UHF, for example, they tend to bend less. VHF and above almost never bend. I said almost never bend because there are instances where these can be bent, which we will look at later if we have the time. Okay, we already saw the example of, saw the pictorial representation of the ionosphere a few minutes back. The lowermost layer is the D layer, which starts at around 60 kilometers and heads on up to 80 kilometers. Right above that is the E layer, which starts at around 100 kilometers and heads on up to 150. This representation, all right, it heads on up to 150 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, and the F layer starts at about 200 kilometers and heads on right up to the edge of space about 500 kilometers up. These three layers are what we constantly refer to as the ionosphere. Uh, let's take a look at the layers, the individual layers of the ionosphere. The D layer, it starts at 60 kilometers and ends at 80 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. The ionization of the D layer depends on the altitude of the sun at the horizon. So this is very specific to region where there is sunlight, right? Uh, and the D layer, it reflects and refracts low frequency and very low frequency waves, but absorbs the medium frequency and high frequency waves. The critical frequency for the D layer is about 160 kilohertz. Uh, Right, critical frequency for the uninitiated is the frequency at or below which an wave component is reflected by the ionospheric layer. Anything above the critical frequency, it just penetrates the layer and proceeds to the next one. Right? The D layer is, in this case, is energized by the alpha particle radiation or and X-ray related ionization that happens in the ionosphere due to solar conditions. Right. Just above the D layer exists the E layer. The E layer is apparently, it starts at about 100 kilometers and heads on up to 150, depends on whom you ask. The ions of the E layer, recombine in the absence of sunlight, losing ionization by night. The E layer loses its ionization by night and is more responsive. It reflects and refracts HF signals to a certain level, and a single hop on the E layer can be about 1000 kilometers, right? And the critical frequency for the E layer is said to be about 4 megahertz. Again, these values are dependent on which literature you're following. It might vary based on the literature and the time at which it was written. Right. So the ionization of the E layer, it occurs basically due to X-ray and UV related radiation. Right. Now we will take a look at the ES layer or the sporadic E layer that we might have studied about during our ASOC exam days. As the name suggests, it can appear very sporadically or randomly, and hence it's called the sporadic E layer. If it appears for during both day and night. It provides a very good skip path, but is highly unreliable due to its sporadic nature. A single skip of the sporadic E layer can be about 2500 kilometers, and the critical frequency of the layer is about 225 kilohertz. As you can see in the small pictorial representation here, you can imagine a sporadic E as a sort of an ionized cloud that is present sometimes in the E layer, and of course this is not always present, hence the name sporadic E. And when sporadic E occurs, a single skip of the, as you can see on the sporadic E layer, can be in the magnitude of thousands of kilometers. So it's very useful when it occurs, but it is highly unreliable. And we'll take a look at the F layer, which is the last and the topmost layer of the ionosphere. It begins at about 150 kilometers and extends up to 500 kilometers, which is the edge of space. Uh, and it splits into the F1 and F2 layers during the night. And this recombines back into the F layer. I'm sorry, this splits into the F1 and F2 during the day and recombines back into the F layer during the night time. But for all intents and purposes, we refer to it as simply as the F layer itself, not as F1 and F2 when we refer to propagation conditions. The F layer is mostly and highly responsible for HF propagation that we enjoy on our higher bands. Right. Right. Now let's take a look at the two layers of the F layer. The F1 layer, it occurs at about 150 to 220 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, and it occurs mainly during the day. Skips of about 3,000 kilometers are possible on this F1 layer. The usability of the F1 layer is left at the mercy of the E layer. During periods of high solar activity, the E layer can reflect HF away from the F layer, inducing shorter skips. Imagine, like over the past few years, I think this might have been a problem for us when the F layer was left at the mercy of the E layer. All the local propagation conditions started to fluctuate very rapidly. So this was because mainly because of the F1 layer. And let's take a look at the F2 layer. It starts at about 220 and goes on right up to 500 kilometers. It recombines as the F1 with F1 at night, and it's present throughout the day. Skips of about 4,000 kilometers are possible on this layer. Activity on the F2 layer is dictated mainly by the extreme UV and solar winds that affect the layer. And here's a very basic pictorial representation of how the layers split during the day and night. As you can see here, during the day, the F layer is split into the F2 and the F1 layer. And as you can see, during the day, the D layer is present, and during the night, the D layer completely disappears, and the F layer recombines once again. As you can see, ground wave because of the recombination of the F layer and it losing its ionization levels, the E layer becomes the predominant layer for communication, and that is one of the primary reason why the lower bands are more active during night times. Uh, right. Right. So you might ask why all this blabbering on about layers, right? So basically, if you look at it, it's labeled as how, if you know how to work if you know how layers work, you will be able to work DX. That's the whole point of it. As you can see here, the ionosphere starts getting energized during the day. However, bands such as 160, 80, and 40 start losing their ability to skip across large distances as the lower ionosphere prevents it from doing so. Uh, Higher bands such as 30 through 10 are able to are unaffected by the lower layers of the ionosphere and are able to make substantial skips, which provides very favorable conditions for DX, right? However, as you can see during the sunset, uh, the D layer disappears, and the lower frequencies are able to penetrate much higher and use the D layer as a sort of a platform to skip to bounce off and provide skip communication during the night time, right? Right. So I'll just take a small break here and break for questions. So any doubts till now, please feel free to ask me. I'll try to get it. Right. Now we will take a look at something called gray line propagation. The gray line is the band around Earth that separates daylight from the darkness, right? As you can probably see here from where I'm moving the mouse cursor. It's very useful for DXing as the D layer disappears in the sunset region over here, and it is yet to build up in the sunrise region, which is around here, right? Like I said earlier, with the disappearance of the D layer, the E layer becomes the main layer for skip propagation of the HF radio waves, and it provides very good path for DXing and gray line propagation. It's the good time to do gray line propagation is about 30 minutes prior to or after sunrise or sunset. So remember about gray line propagation. It's very useful for working DX during early mornings and late evenings. Right. Okay, short and long path. I'm sure many of us would have heard about it. As the name suggests, a short path is the shortest route between radio stations. It's the direct route, you could say, between a transmitter and a receiver. And long path, as the name suggests, is the longer route taken by the signal. As you can see here, this is the short path indicated in white, right? And the long path is over and near the poles and over here. Conditions may not favor short path communication most of the times, but it can favor long path communications. And a good way to figure out if you're working long path is to look for a very noticeable echo when working station on long path. This is because of the multiple skips that the signal is doing to get your receiver antenna. So that's a very reliable way of figuring out if you're working long path, right? Right. We looked at critical angle earlier, right? As you can see here in this pictorial representation, anything above the critical angle is basically it just penetrates the ionized layer and moves on, right? And anything below the critical angle tends to bounce off the ionized layer and reach the receiver. Critical angle and angle of radiation are two very important but topics that I would like to just touch upon. The maximum angle at which the radio waves are reflected back to Earth is the critical angle. Now, right. Critical angle it decreases with frequency, right? So if you go for the lower bands, like say 80 meters or even 160, the critical angle will be very less. And the angle of radiation is the takeoff angle of the radio wave with respect to ground. We've always heard our Elmers tell us to raise the antenna. This is simply because it lowers the takeoff angle, making it much easier for the DX station to hear you. The radiation angle of 20 degrees or less is said to be good for DX. The magical number is half lambda above the ground, right? So this is a very brief. I'm just touching upon these two very important factors, though, which are very important for working DX. I suggest the listener do his or her own research on this topic and figure out a lot more information. Right. Before we move on to solar indices, I really want to take a break for any questions that the listener might have. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have right now. Okay, fine. I will proceed with this topic of solar indices. It's a little bit of a drab topic, so I hope I don't present this as a lullaby, and hope everyone gets to understand what solar indices are all about. So let's move on. So radiation from the sun, it ionizes molecules in the ionosphere, creating free electrons. This is what we refer to as ionization. When the levels of ionization are high, the ionosphere is more refractive to radio waves, which gives us better maximum usable frequency and better conditions. Sunspots cause higher solar radiation conditions, leading to better radio propagation. And we'll take a look at sunspots and solar flares in a minute, but just know that sunspots can cause high solar radiation conditions, which can cause better radio propagation. And solar flares, on the other hand, they can totally disrupt the Earth's geomagnetic field and can cause geomagnetic storms, right? So what are these sunspots? Sunspots are these are temporary dark spots on the sun, and they appear to be dark to us because they are lower in temperature compared to the face of the sun. Even though these are lower in temperature, they are spots with intense magnetic fields. The magnetic fields are said to be so high that even the high temperature plasma that surrounds these sunspots are not able to get inside the sunspot. We'll probably, as you can see in this picture, right? You can see very high magnetic activity around the sunspot, and as you can very clearly see, the plasma is unable to enter the location of the sunspot. These sunspots are monitored very closely as they can turn into solar flare. Remember, sunspots are good and solar flares are a problem. Activity of sunspots, it's measured in something called SSN, or smoothed sunspot number, which is an averaged value, right? Here you can take a look at the different types of solar flares, sunspots that can occur. They are basically classified into three types: alpha, beta, and delta sunspots. Again, these are not something that is necessary to be learned, but it's just good information to know anyway, right? So as you can see, the alpha sunspots, they are unipolar in nature, right? They don't have a bipolar magnetic field running between them, and these pose very little threat, but they are constantly watched so that we can see if they can turn into troublesome sunspots in the future, right? Like beta or delta class sunspots. The beta class sunspots are they are bipolar in nature, as you can see, right? And they can cause a little bit of a problem for us. The flares that these sunspot causes, they are called C and M flares, and delta class sunspots. They can cause M or X class sun flares, right? Solar flares, like I spoke about, these are violent bursts of radiation. Imagine the sun chucking out radiation all around it. So these solar flares are basically the catapult of the sun, which throw away intense radiation into space, and some of it is unfortunately or fortunately directed towards us. The solar flares which are directed towards the Earth, they can disrupt the Earth's magnetic fields and cause geomagnetic storms. And when there is a intense solar flare activity, these can cause periods of HF blackout where there is absolutely no station that can be heard during that time, and intense auroral activity which might be useful for high banders, high band DX chasers like 2 meter DX chasers and things like that. Right. As I said earlier, solar flare, they can be classified into 5 types: A, B, C, M, and X. Again, there is no particular need to learn about what the solar flares can do, but it's just generally good information to know how these solar flares can affect HF radio conditions. We don't need to be worried about A or B class flares. C, M, and X, they can cause a little bit of problems for us, as you can see. Again, these conditions are again cited only if the Earth is in the trajectory of these charged particles, which are thrown away by the sun. Now we'll take a look at something called the sunspot cycle. It's a nearly periodic 11-year cycle of change in magnetic activity, going from active to quiet to active again. During this time, we refer to the crests as the solar maxima and the solar minima, right? And the cycle spans from one minima one minima to the next, right? So this is one complete cycle. We are at the end of cycle 24, which is supposed to, is predicted to end mid 2019 to late 2020. So I hope we will see conditions improve towards the end of 2020, right? Now we take a look at solar flux. Solar flux is the indicator to show the level of radiation received from the sun. It's measured in solar flux units by measuring the noise on the 2800 megahertz band. And it varies from a value of 50 to 300. Lower values generally indicate a lower maximum usable frequency on HF. Solar flux units are generally a very good indicator of the F2 layer, and can be seen as a as a sort of a direct indicator of the of the availability of DX on a band. So basically, high solar flux units they occur during the peak of any sunspot cycle. As you can see in the previous slide, these are all times when there is peak activity of or there is a peak SFU numbers, right? Right. Now we will look at the Earth's own, geomagnetic fields and how we measure the interference in these geomagnetic fields. We use something called geomagnetic indices. They are two numbers which we use to determine the severity of these fluctuations, the A and K index. The K index is a quasi-logarithmic scale. It's not good for a long-term prediction, and it's ranged on a scale of 0 to 9. A index is a daily average system for measuring the geomagnetic activity on a scale of 0 to 400. Average of both these indices from all over the globe are presented as AP and KP indices. As you can see here, the lower the K value, the better the geomagnetic conditions on Earth, right? So this is, I'm sure all of us would have seen this when we logged into QRZ.com. It's basically solar data for figuring out how the bands are. As you can see here, this is the solar flux index. Solar flux index of 68. Okay, let's move on to the next slide where I interpret the data, help you interpret the data, right? As you can see here, the solar flux index is listed as 68 on a value of, and it's measured on a value of 50 to 300. And as I said earlier, the lower the value, the lower the maximum usable frequency. A very direct effect of this can be seen right here, where only the lower bands are pretty open. All the higher bands are completely closed. That's mainly due to the solar flux index being on the lower side, right? And here you can see the A and K index. The A index is set at 5 and the K index value is stated as 1. If you can take a look at the previous tabular column here, an A index of 5 and a K index of 1, it reads as quiet to unsettled. So the geomagnetic field around the Earth is pretty stable, so you don't have to be worried about it. And as you can see here, the solar flare probability is also set at 10%. And as you can see, the geomagnetic field is very quiet because of the low A and K index numbers. Right? So, okay, so you've now learned about you've now heard about all these information. How do you put it to practical use, right? So how do you assess propagation? Well, the age-old way of doing it is to just go on air and listen to the bands, right? There are other far more modern ways of doing it. One way of doing it is to use software such as VOA Cap or DX Maps to figure out when propagation to a certain location would be open, and to take a look at the general conditions of the ionosphere. And these are, remember, these are predictions based on the values that we enter, right? And you can also do a bit of live spotting on websites such as WebSDR. like how our local 40-meter net controllers do. They usually check for skip against our Chennai WebSDR. I'm pretty sure DXS can be a little bit more creative and look at other WebSDRs in other countries to check if their signals are getting through, right? And the other website that a lot of these digital users, digital mode users use is PSK Reporter, which will give you a live map of who's able to hear you and whom you are able to hear, and basically a live map of the propagation conditions on the particular band. And of course, you can run a weak signal propagation reporter beacon, which will basically tell you, if this much amount of power is heading through to this location at this time. You can probably make a very, very informed guess as to when you can go QRO and work a particular location, right? And the other method is to look for propagation beacons, right? These propagation beacons are at 18 different locations around the world, and they come up at different times. And by listening to the frequencies of these propagation beacons, we are able to figure out if a particular propagation path becomes open to a certain location, right? Right. I think we've reached the end of the HF section, right? Just like to point out all listeners to the resources that I've used for making this presentation. First off, big hats off to, it should be a doctor there, Dr. Tamitha Skov, or otherwise known as the Space Weather Woman. I suggest all listeners to check out our YouTube channel. It's just filled with a lot of resources on space weather propagation and solar conditions, and a lot of very interesting topics. But again, these are on a more these are produced on a level where even radio amateurs with very little science background, they can follow the information, right? And like I showed you earlier, the propagation data, it's provided by November Zero November Bravo Hotel. You can take a look at his website. There's a lot of resources which are given there. And another website that I suggest is sunspotwatch.com. You can go there and you will find a lot of articles and also a lot of solar data which is relevant for studying propagation conditions. And another great book that I found online was this book from the 1960s called Ionospheric Radio Propagation by Kenneth Davies. Again, this book is available online for free. So all you need to do is just do a Google search and find the link to this book. Even though it's authored in the 60s, the information still holds good till today. So I would suggest this book to anyone serious about learning about radio propagation, right? Another resource is the Space Weather Services from the Bureau of Meteorology, the government of from the government of Australia. They seem to have a very detailed website, or rather, should I say, detailed resources for the radio amateur to go and spend a lot of time to learn about space weather and also make a few predictions. There are a couple of softwares and tools which are presented there to make propagation predictions. I highly suggest that that the listeners check out the SWS website. And of course, there's a lot of ARRL and RSGB publications that will help you out in this manner, right? I think with that, I'd like to close this webinar. I'll now take any questions. I presume I've run through the topic very quickly, so I will take any questions that people might have. Okay, so Prem has asked how sunspots affect propagation. Right, as I said earlier, sunspots, what they do is they cause a lot of the the solar material, the radiated material, to be thrown out into space uh, as they develop into solar flares. Sunspots, as such, they don't cause any problems, but once they develop into solar flare, they start chucking out violent bursts of radiation to the earth, and this affects our geomagnetic conditions, right? uh, Okay, any other questions? I think I might have rushed through the topic uh, I might have rushed through the topic too much. So if there's any questions, please do ask right away. You can set up VOA cap. Although VOA cap can be used, I heavily suggest the use of dxmaps.com. Dxmaps is a little bit more advanced. So I hope that answers your question, View to SXA. Yeah, I will send a copy of the PPT after the webinar is over, Jaydeep. Right. Okay, there's a question from Monica Kulkarni, V3 OPX. The critical angle which you mentioned, if we use omnidirectional antenna, how do we align the antenna? Well, basically, the as I said earlier, the critical angle it goes down as you go higher, right? So one option is to increase the height or decrease the height of the antenna, right? And Anish, via to AOU asks, heard like good band condition may come again only after a few years. What is the reason behind that? Okay, Anish, as I said earlier, we have something called the sunspot cycle. What happens is this sunspot cycle is a 11-year cycle. And during the peak of this sunspot cycle, there will be excellent propagation conditions. I encourage you to read up on this sunspot cycle. Basically, we are at the end of cycle 24, and like I said earlier, it's supposed to end late 2020. So I'm hoping that the conditions will improve by the end of this year. I hope that answers your question, Anish. Uh, right. Any other questions? Any other doubts? Anything that I might have rushed through? Please feel free to ask me. Okay, Shindo A65DB Alpha 65 Delta Bravo asks how long path helps in DXing. Like I said earlier, Shindo, short path might not be open to a location all the time, or you might not be able to work short path all the time. In that case, a long path propagation will be very helpful to work that particular place, Shindo. Right. Any further questions? Right. Okay. I think I will close down the session in a couple of minutes. But before that, I ask everyone to please make a note of these resources and spend some time doing research on these particular ones, especially the YouTube channel by Dr. Tamita Skov. There is a fantastic amount of information there that will probably take us years to comprehend, but it's been presented in such a fantastic way that non-technical people such as myself are able to pretty much understand of what's going on, right? And another website that I highly suggest is sunspotwatch.com. I urge all listeners to take a look at these two resources in particular and conduct your research in those in that particular path, right? Right. Um, Does propagation have anything to do with band noise? Okay, Nishal, basically propagation, what we mean by propagation is the behavior of the radio waves as it travels through the various parts of the atmosphere. So there is a little bit of there is the noise on the band is mainly due to the geomagnetic conditions and the uh, conditions such as lightning and other earth weather activities also. So that is something to think about. And as I said earlier, band noise can come from multiple sources. So I encourage you to take up this topic. But propagation as such doesn't refer to band noise, I could say, right? So I guess with that, if there are no other questions, I can close down the seminar. So please go ahead and ask any questions if you have any. Oh, thanks, Pujit. So, right. Arvind, I'm not very sure about this. This news is pretty new to me as it is to you. So let me probably take a look at this and get back to you. But thank you very much for that, Arvind. I will definitely take a look at this. Right. Okay. I think we can all close down here. Right. I will be sharing the PPT after the webinar is over. Do stand by. I will be sending the PPT and along with the resources. So So I think we can close down now. Thank you all for joining in. I'm pretty sure you all had very good things to do, and thank you for taking about 45 minutes of your time to listen to this old man babble on about propagation. So, like I said earlier, I'll be sharing this PPT after this webinar. So I guess that wraps it up. So nothing much to say. 7-3 and stay safe all. And thanks to Sri Kumar and his entire team for putting this lockdown webinar in place so that we can all have some fun during the lockdown. So 7-3 is on. VU3WR closing. Bye bye.